Welcome to the Everest Insights, where we decode the intersection of capital, policy, and innovation for Asia's discerning investors. My name is Jeff Lee, CEO of Everest Strategic Asset Management. The rising power in AI models, founders/executives, employees, or Congress. I believe the Anthropic-DoD conflict clearly showed a new power rising in the AI space, but in my view, the real leverage today rests primarily with the founders and executives of the leading AI companies, not just with the models themselves. These leaders are currently able to impose significant restrictions on how their models can be used, such as blocking applications for mass domestic surveillance or fully autonomous weapons. Because there is still no comprehensive federal AI governance law in place, I think private companies should not be adding these extra ethical or usage restrictions on their own beyond what existing laws already require. Instead, decisions about lawful government and military applications should be left to Congress and the established legal framework, so that individual executives don't end up setting de facto national security policy through technical safeguards baked into their models. An important additional layer is the influence of employees within these LLM companies. Engineers, researchers, and other staff often play a key role in shaping internal governance and policy. For instance, in recent weeks, employees at OpenAI and Google have signed open letters supporting Anthropic's red lines on military AI use, urging their own companies to adopt similar boundaries against mass surveillance and fully autonomous weapons. These grassroots efforts, through internal advocacy, public statements, or cultural pressure, can push founders and executives towards stronger safety commitments or resistance to certain government demands. While founders like Dario Amodei set the high-level direction, employee voice amplify ethical considerations and can influence contract negotiations or model design. This internal dynamic adds complexity. Power isn't solely top-down from executives, but can bubble up from the workforce, potentially creating more principled stance, but also more fragmentation in how AI governance emerges privately. The guardrail that LLM companies implement should be no different from general IT best practices that prevent unwanted technical consequences, such as hallucinations, prompt injections, data exfiltration, insecure outputs, bias amplification, or other reliability and security vulnerabilities, regardless of the system's ultimate purpose. These are neutral, purpose-agnostic safeguards focused on technical robustness and risk mitigation, much like firewalls, input validation, encryption, access controls, or monitoring in traditional software systems. The intended purpose of the system, whether civilian productivity, intelligence analysis, or military targeting, should be left to the users, including the government. And when it crosses into high-stakes areas that blur civil and military lines or raise fundamental rights issues, ultimately to Congress through clear legislation. Imposing additional value-based restrictions tied to specific end uses, like prohibiting mass domestic surveillance or fully autonomous weapons, goes beyond standard IT/security practices and risks, fermenting inconsistent law interpretation and enforcement. It creates a patchwork where private companies act as de facto regulators, potentially conflicting with existing law, inviting selective compliance, or enabling governments to pressure firms into alignment rather than relying on uniform, democratically established rules. The drama between Anthropic and the Department of Defense, now rebranded as the Department of War under the Trump administration, remained very much active as of March 1st, 2026. The core standoff escalated dramatically last week when Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued an ultimatum to Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei. Drop the company's safeguards against using Claude for mass domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens or fully autonomous weapon systems where AI selects and engages targets without human oversight, or face severe consequences. Anthropic refused, stating it cannot in good conscience accede to demands for unrestricted any lawful use access. By the February 27, 2026 deadline, the administration responded aggressively. President Trump ordered all federal agencies to immediately cease using Anthropic technology with a 6-month phase-out for embedded systems, and Hexas designated Anthropic a complex supply chain risk to national security, an unprecedented and historic action in U.S. history. This designation is typically reserved for foreign adversaries like China's Huawei or Russia's Kaspersky Lab, never before publicly applied to a domestic American company in this manner. In my view, it's driven less by genuine ideology difference over AI safety and more by a demand for absolute loyalty to the administration's vision, a dictatorship-style approach that treats refusal to comply as disloyalty, warranting severe punishment. Anthropic has called the move legally unsound and vowed to challenge it in court, arguing it sets a dangerous precedent for any U.S. firm negotiating with the government. The label bar military contractors, suppliers, and partners from any commercial activity with the company, potentially crippling Anthropic's government business, including its prior approximately $200 million contract for classified deployments, and sending shockwaves through Silicon Valley. Negotiations aren't fully dead. Anthropic has indicated ongoing talks and willingness to collaborate on improving model reliability for defense uses, but the public back and forth continues via statements, social media, including ex-posts from officials and executives, and media leaks. The dispute plays out in real time across platforms, with room for detailed compromise on contract language, technical safeguards, or phased implementations. Meanwhile, OpenAI has capitalized on the rift by swiftly announcing a deal with the DoD to deploy its models on classified networks, announced mere hours after Trump's ban on Anthropic. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman publicly framed the agreement as upholding similar red lines to Anthropic's: prohibitions on mass domestic surveillance and requiring human responsibility for the use of force, including no fully autonomous weapons. Altman emphasized on X that the Pentagon agrees with these principles and that the contract includes multi-layered technical guardrails, cloud-based deployment with cleared personnel oversight, and strong contractual protections, claiming it's even more robust than prior arrangements, including Anthropic's. This move highlights OpenAI's opportunistic positioning. Altman has long advocated for AI safety and shared concern about surveillance/autonomous systems, yet his company quickly filled the gap left by Anthropic's principled stand. In my view, it demonstrates a lack of integrity, publicly supporting the same ethical boundaries while rushing to secure the contract and gain a competitive edge. The contrast is stark. Anthropic paid a heavy price for refusing to compromise on baked-in safeguards, while OpenAI appears to have negotiated acceptable terms without fully capitulating, turning the feud into a business win. This episode has far-reaching implications for the U.S. tech ecosystem. By wielding tools like supply chain risk designations against a domestic innovator, the administration signaled vastly expanded government power to dictate technology governance, especially for dual-use technologies like AI, where civil and military applications blur, and the arms race with adversaries like China intensifies. The power to drive governance becomes even more uncertain and dynamic. Founders and executives can embed restrictions. Employees can push back internally or publicly. But the executive branch can now retaliate with existential threats, potentially chilling innovation, forcing loyalty tests, or pushing companies toward compliance or foreign alternatives. Congress must step in to establish clear, balanced rules rather than allowing these ad hoc power struggles to reshape the industry. I strongly support the principle that weapons and technologies capable of great harm must ultimately be controlled by lawful government hands. I see a clear parallel with nuclear technology. private companies in the United States already develop and supply critical components, missiles, warheads, delivery systems, and more for the nuclear arsenal. Companies like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing hold massive contracts for this work, but they do not have the authority to restrict or veto how the government ultimately assembles, deploys, or uses those weapons. I apply the same logic to AI. In my opinion, Anthropic, or any similar firm, should be permitted to develop powerful models for the U.S. government without embedding permanent, non-negotiable restrictions that prevent downstream military or defense uses. If the government decides it needs specialized AI for weaponry or other high-stakes applications, it should have the ability to designate trusted contractors, such as Palantir, which already has deep integration with the DoD and handles sensitive AI/ML workflows for defense to build, adapt, or extend those systems. I do not think Anthropic should be able to block Palantir or any other government-approved entity from using its underlying model technology to create AI-enabled weapons. Allowing private companies to impose such vetoes would, in my view, represent unacceptable overreach into the government's rightful domain. I am concerned that permitting private AI companies to impose broad, hard-coded restrictions creates a dangerous precedent. If the same logic is extended, companies could start restricting the use of neutral foundational inputs, such as electricity, steel, or other industrial materials, based on how those materials might eventually be applied in harmful ways. I see this as unacceptable. Foundational technologies should remain available for all lawful government purposes without private veto power. The right balance, as I see it, is for private enterprises to innovate freely and supply advanced tools, including powerful AI models, while the government, through Congress, existing laws, and carefully designated contractor, retains full authority over how those tools are ultimately weaponized or applied in national security contexts. In summary, my position is clear. I prioritize state sovereignty in matters of defense and weaponry. I oppose excessive private interference in lawful government uses, and I believe Congress, not individual executives, employees, or the executive branch, should be the body that establishes clear rules when powerful new technologies like AI enter high-stakes military domains. I view the current dispute as exposing the risks created by the existing regulatory gap, but the Trump administration's unprecedented supply chain risk designation on Anthropic elevates those risks dramatically. It reveals a dictatorial impulse to crush non-compliant private enterprise under the guise of national security, with profound consequences for tech governance, innovation, and the U.S. position in the global AI race. This latest escalation, with OpenAI stepping in opportunistically, only reinforces the urgency. Founders like Altman can exploit these gaps for advantage. Employees can influence through advocacy. But true governance belongs with Congress to prevent such power struggles from undermining national security, ethical consistency, or the freedom of American companies to operate without loyalty tests. The drama is far from over, with legal challenges likely ahead. But it underscores why we need balanced federal oversight rather than letting executives, employees, or the executive branch dictate terms through model design, public posturing, selective deal-making, or punitive designations.